This is The Change Physician, episode 214. Welcome back to The Change Physician. I am Melissa Katie, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And, off air, we were starting to talk about something that I was like, oh, this is a topic we gotta chat about, because we both have perspective in this. Not everyone can say they've been on both sides of the aisle here, but we've both been employees and we've both been business owners, and the difference in mindset between a business owner and employee, I think, is quite striking. And being that I'm like my own business owner, like solely my own business owner, I'm not employed by anybody. There are things that you have to learn and what to do and how to manage situations for not only your own survival, but if you have to involve other people. So I thought it might be good. I can bring up some points, but do you want to start just chatting about some of the things you were just discussing off air?
Yeah, sure. So, this is, it's always interesting to hear people talk about what they should or should not getting paid. And typically, because most people aren't business owners, people say, well, I deserve this, or I should be paying this, or this person's getting this much money and I should be paid, oh, Jeff Bezos is worth whatever ungodly amount he's worth, and so I should be making $600 an hour sticking stuff in boxes or whatever. And this is not a discussion on workers' rights or what is fair and equitable labor practices. Let's speak this straight out, because there has been times for sure where workers have been taken advantage of. But on the flip side, being an employee is extremely different than being a business owner. Mm-hmm. So if you are not taking the perspective of the risks that are involved with being a business owner or having a business, then you're kind of speaking in ignorance, right? Mm-hmm. So just because, like, let's talk about like a trades, and someone goes out and the bill is X, and maybe the trade worker is getting paid whatever their hourly rate is. Mm-hmm. What is built into that bill, which may be 2 or 3 times or more what the trade worker is getting paid, is all the risk the business owner is taking in, plus what they are hoping for is a degree of profit in order for them to live on, mm-hmm. or to reflect to their shareholders or whatever.
Right.
So it's never an apples to apples comparison when you're talking an employee versus business owner. Now, having been on both sides of the equation when I was in business, so that, in medicine, sort of this different little beast. Like, you can go off, and if you're in private practice as compared to an employed position, I guarantee you the stress is different. Mm-hmm. Right. One of the advantages, depending on what your specialty is if you set up the systems, it's so heavily regulated that you kind of know where things are going to go. Like, if you are in a highly in-demand specialty and you set up your business and you're not stupid about, what spaces that you're renting, and you start off slow and maybe you're not buying the brand new office equipment or whatever, you can do relatively well because of the regulations in medicine. The barriers to entry are so huge. If you are doing something else, though, that is not, that you don't have that advantage of, and you don't have all that, because there's regulation can be advantage to people who are in the regulatory system. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to have medical training, you have to have the licensure, everything else. Nobody else can come out and all of a sudden start doing what you do. But when you are, say, because I did mostly consultancy and training, that was a completely different beast, because now my income was being tied to contracts. And you have to then be thinking long term, like, you had to be looking so far ahead as like, where's my next paycheck going to be coming from? Where's this income going to be coming from? That it made it very, very difficult to, your spending choices became different. And then sort of how you lived your life became very different. I will say, from a financial aspect, I mean, if you were like, the other thing is what I consulted in was not something that was like in huge, massive demand. So it was always a struggle, but your spending becomes different, because instead of doing kind of like, oh, I can plan and do this because I know next month I'm getting paid, and then the month after that getting paid, or next year I have a realistic expectation of what my income is going to be. I had to do this retrograde thing where it was literally like, do whatever I'm doing. And at the end of the year, when I'm doing taxes, is to figure out how much then could I put into something else, like into my retirement accounts. That was extraordinarily stressful. Like some people thrive on that uncertainty. I did not. I think if I had been in a position where that income train, that sort of conveyor had been more certain. Like, so if you were, outside of medicine, if you have a really good marketing and you have a pipeline of business coming in and you've really optimized that, that's a different thing. Cause now you have some degree of predictability unless something crazy comes up like COVID or whatever. But that was really, really hard. Like that was very, very difficult. I mean, you do that now in your business. Like, so what, I mean, the lucky thing that you have is you have pretty firm relationships with your surgeons. They have an OR schedule. So you kind of, I don't know what they're booking out for operations, but you can kind of look and at least kind of gauge what the next month, I would assume, or next 2 months are going to be. So that would be advantageous. But what's the difference, do you think, between being a business owner where it's, again, this eat what you kill kind of thing versus being an employee in your old group? Although I'm not exactly sure the details on that, because some of these employed groups are kind of more eat what you kill too as well now. So
yeah, it depends how it's laid out. Sometimes people are like 1099s versus W2s, and there's different kind of infrastructures. I've worked before after my training 1 year with a group in San Antonio that it was just, there was a small percentage they took for all the billing part and pretty much eat what you kill. And then I went into a group where it was started at 1099 and developed into a W2, and then some benefits based on if I did at least 4 days a week. So I capitalized on that. But it's always a weird thing when you're in a group that's set up where you have to show up every day, and you are not, it's not like you're saying yes or no to cases, unless you have to cancel because there's a real good medical reason. But it's not like you can base your value on compared to somebody else, like how many cases and what your units are and all these things that they do in anesthesia, because you don't have the power to recruit other, like you go where you told you to go. It's not like you're gonna like, oh, I'll do more cases, I'll do this and that. No, you're gonna go to a facility that already has a schedule and you just do it until it's done. And so there's not that same kind of thing. Now that's where it's interesting as employees, if someone seems to be getting a better schedule and you feel like you're getting worked to the bone, and they might be full-time, but you're part-time, and somehow you get the longer days when you're part-time, and then the full-time get shorter days, and you feel like there's a sense of like favoritism or something. So whether it's accurate, true or not, the perception of how you're being utilized and getting paid less because you're not full time, even though you might be taking call like everyone is.
Let me interrupt you here though, because were you paid hourly or were you paid on the RVUs
salaried.
You generated? You were salaried. Okay, so that's totally right for abuse.
That's
from a medical perspective. And most people, salary is great, but when you're in anesthesia and you're generating RVUs.
Yeah. So can be a much different scenario. Could go to an hourly rate without benefits. And I'm not saying I'm just kind of giving the ideas of different things that can go on. Everyone kind of has a different situation. There might be some people that have hourly, or they could be salaried. But many times groups have like these salaried situations if it's not eat what you kill kind of layout. So, there's smaller groups, bigger groups, and all that. Now that I'm on my own, what's interesting is you have to recognize the infrastructure of revenue. And so if you are predominantly cash, which I am, then you can kind of predict, you can make your fee schedule, but yet you're trying to keep it where it's reasonable, because you don't want it to be like just kind of a problem with the combined price that the surgeon's trying to sell to their patients, because they have to include the surgery center, the anesthesia, and their fee. So you don't want to be unreasonable, and you want to keep their business. But that's what's interesting, is trying to create the fee schedule that makes sense.
Then once you have the fee schedule and you're predominantly cash, and you have a schedule in advance,
Mhm.
you have predictable income.
Right.
And
Right.
that's sort of like the big determinant, at least in my brain, for someone who needs a degree of certainly like my brain likes,
Mhm.
is predictability of income, because predictability of income allows you to actually to make plans.
Right. This is the other challenge with making plans. So if your fee schedule based on what currently is going on in the economy, inflation, the demand for anesthesia, and the people that might be able to help you, I have no employees. I don't want employees. I have 1099s and I hire someone to cover me. If another anesthesiologist is expecting a certain amount per hour, my fee schedule is either on par or less than, I'm going to be in the hole.
Mhm.
So when you take vacation, you don't, I mean, you don't get paid unless you have enough of a discrepancy between what's being, whoever's covering you and what your fee schedule is. So it makes you realize that sometimes your fee schedule needs to be a little bit higher in order to compensate, because remember, there is some insurance cases which won't pay as well as the cash.
Well, because that's a whole, from a strictly business standpoint, that's the whole thing about understanding value and worth and being able to build into your either your fee schedule or what your business processes are, all the non-reimbursed time. Like when people tend to start off in business, they tend to underestimate or underbill because they don't recognize all the time that they are spending that is non-revenue time. So like a consultant, like if you're charging $500-600 an hour, and people say, well, that's a lot of money. Okay, well, that's a lot of money if you are getting paid for every hour of the day. It is very rare to be a consultant and actually to have 40 hours of billable time in a week for $600 an hour. And so what that then is covering, that has to cover the time that's spent in marketing, that has to cover the time spent researching, that has to cover all this other time that may or not be included with it. The thing, there's another big differentiator between a business and an employee, though, is your time perspective. Like as an employer, or actually not as employer, as a business owner or freelancer or whoever, when you, the one thing that is really cool is that you are technically in control of your time. Now you have a kind of a different set of this because you have the surgeons, and so that sort of dictates your stuff. But you can decide, you know, if you want to take 10 weeks of vacation a year, you theoretically could do that. Nobody's telling you what your vacation benefits are. On the downside, though, is if you're on vacation, unless you have a full business where you have an infrastructure and you have employees, which is a whole nother, like I'm like you, I never had employees. So I guess technically I was a freelancer or a solopreneur. You're not going to be making any money unless, you know, you really aren't. Yeah. So that's something to be considering.
Yeah. Well, and here, you know, when you're trying to take time off, I personally, I'm putting things into position to have some, because you're dealing with medical records and people understanding the patients and what's coming up. So you have to be organized. I am a super organized person. I'm OCD with details. I like things to make sense. I want to make sure I communicate well with people. So those are things I can put in place, but you're never really off. Like you can be, but you really have to have someone you completely trust and willing to pay, or in some way they're compensated for helping you. But even if I go on a big vacation, I am still probably going to spend 30 minutes a day to review emails, forward things, input things, make sure everything's organized so that everything runs well on the back end when I'm gone. And you have to trust people to bring them in to cover. And even if you have coverage, we know emergencies can happen. And there is a moment where of stress that you're thinking, what if they get in a car accident? It's not, even if you have a locums backup or someone else the surgeon could call, like, to me, plan A, plan B, plan C is what I have to have instituted. But it's not always that easy. And when emergencies happen, even the best locums companies may not have the coverage for those cases. So you are at risk for your patients not having, since you're not there, they're not going to have the person to take care of them. And all of those months, those 4 months, those patients waiting for the surgeries, if they can't be done, patients aren't going to be happy, surgeons aren't going to be happy. You're at risk of losing your business with that surgeon if they're not understanding or, mad enough. So those are things. And then on top of it, you have to be organized enough or have people do it for you. But even from an accounting standpoint, people are so used to, as an employee, oh, take this stuff out of my,
Paycheck.
check. And you're just used to people doing it for you. You don't even think about it. You may do it wrong. You don't, whatever. You'll find out eventually. You have to do estimated quarterly payments on, and a lot of times your first year out, you don't know what you're making at all, even if you have some predictability. And then you have to figure out tax planning. Okay, what do I need to pay so I don't get penalized and pay penalties? And so every quarter I need to pay, estimated payments, and that's from a personal tax standpoint. But then you have to figure out how much of the business money is going to be, like, if you're doing like a, typical LLC, maybe a small corporation or S Corp setup, you have to pay yourself as an employee. So you're like an owner employee. And so you figure out what you need to pay yourself. It's a reasonable salary. And then, oh, by the way, they're going to have the federal taxes go out from your paycheck to yourself every month. Oh, and on top, the estimated quarterly payments as a personal tax. This is stuff that you learn as you go a lot of times, because, people don't try to learn this stuff unless you have to learn it. Totally different.
And it is learnable.
It is.
But it is very different. And I guess that's the biggest thing. It's very different. It's a very different mindset. You said, like what you said about when you're not working, you're still working. That was the biggest thing for me. Like, I remember when I took this position in it, and so I am employed now, and there was a number of different reasons I did that. Some of it was just simply the contract work. I just got sick of trying to find contracts. And number two is I had kids that were going to school. So I wanted it. I was having a very difficult time with my brain figuring out how I was going to pay for this stuff in a predictable manner. But when I took this position, it was so weird. Like, all of a sudden you're done with work and you're not thinking anymore. Now in medicine, so I'm non-clinical. So that's the other thing, because that is also a very different thing. When you're an employed physician, you may not be talking business anymore, but you typically are still going to be thinking about work. Did I say the right thing? Did I miss this with this patient? Oh, something happened, and wait a second. I saw that first person 3 hours ago, and I just thought about that. So it's very, very, very hard to take your brain off of it. So I'm kind of thinking about two different things there. One, as a physician, it's hard no matter what you do, and you can never turn your brain off if you're doing clinical work. But the joy for me, man, is when I'm off, I am off. And it has been so long since I've had that. It almost makes up for the fact that I'm not in full control of my time, which really irritates me. Like, I miss being in control of my time. But that is like one of the joys of being a quote unquote employee is, man, you can turn your brain off. You're off work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there's another thing is people expect. Well, first, we mentioned the fact that you don't have to worry about someone covering you when it comes to a clinical role as a solo business owner. Make sure your patients are taken care of. And in my case, this unique, what do you call it? Like this dyad of this surgeon anesthesiologist relationship. That's one thing. But many times as an employee, you're expecting benefits. You're expecting this or that, like medical insurance, your 401k, your disability. I pay for my own disability. Usually pay it at the end of the year, just in a lump sum. I don't do traditional medical insurance. I just, use cost sharing and some other policies just to help cover and big expense kind of medical stuff. 401k, if you want to have it sponsored by your own business, I have my own solo 401k, which can be a great, as far as tax write-offs. You can even have your employee, so there's all these things as a business owner you get the perks of, especially if you file as an S Corp, there's all kind. We've had a conversation about that before, but
well, and that's something that people get upset because they'll hear something like, well, this business owner did this and they're sheltering taxes. And then obviously there's some egregious things that have been gone wrong when you have someone like Peter Thiel and you got Mark Zuckerberg and these guys who are putting, I think billions in things like Roth, however they structure it in such a way that they're being able to put this much into a Roth IRA, where it's technically now going to be tax-free when they withdraw. There's some issues with that, but you always got to consider the people who aren't the billionaires when we're thinking, and we don't want to punish them because most people aren't billionaires. And when you're in a business owner and you are now planning for your retirement life or whatever, and you have all these uncertainties that again, you didn't have, that you don't typically will have, or you shouldn't have as much with an employee. I'm just going to put that out there. You shouldn't have as much of an employee. Then there's a reason that there are these tax deductions for them, or that there's ways that they can actually put more or less money into those accounts. And I don't have a problem with that at all. Like obviously, because I took advantage of a couple of them, but that unpredictability, you can't, you just simply can't treat a business owner and employee the same. We were talking about this in something else when it had to do with, when you're in different positions, you can't be treated exactly the same when it comes to business. Whether it's your training, whether it's your status, it simply doesn't work because it's not a fair comparison. And you can't say, well, I want all the advantages of being a business owner and I want to make all these profits and I want all this other stuff, without taking in the disadvantages of the uncertainty, the unpredictability, that something like COVID can come and completely disrupt your entire business model. And you're not going to get, severance pay as a business owner. You're not going to get any of that stuff.
Right.
So, everything balance is important in this world, but you also got to remember that you can't compare apples to oranges when it comes to these things. And so there's a reason that there are certain things in business. Are there some advantages? Yes. Are physicians traditionally screwed? Yes. Yes, that's it. That's an interesting thing. You start looking in like the tax code a little bit and see who has the best advantages. And this is flat out wrong, is the people who typically write the codes for these, the tax codes. Those are the ones who somehow become very, have some decided advantages. And weirdly, when new tax codes come in, they somehow exclude physicians, which
real estate get benefits.
Yeah.
It's always interesting because a lot of people who are wealthy are into real estate. So if you're married to like a real estate agent, there's some perks there too. But there's this book, actually, if you ever want to, I'll mention this book because I learned a lot. The Tax and Legal Playbook. Mark Kohler, he's like an accountant and an attorney, and he gives some insight into some of these perks that I didn't even know about. It's based on all the tax code stuff. So but yeah, it's there was something else I was going to say. Did I interrupt you?
Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah, I'm thinking about the technical responsibilities as I want to say employer. I'll say just as a business owner. I think when you become an employer, it just takes to another level. You deal with dynamics and hiring and firing and all these ways you can't say certain things and just unemployment stuff, like all these things that can fall into play. I personally don't want that kind of.
Well, in a simple one, vacation. So if you're a practice owner and you're the sole owner of the practice, vacation becomes a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work then? I would always be honest with your staff or whatever, but realistically, I think the employment law state is that your employees aren't stuck to your vacation schedule. So theoretically, if you go take a 2-week vacation or whatever, and your staff says, well, I don't want to get paid, depending on what the rules are in your state and everything, well, they're going to be working. Now, and without the practice being open, you may not be making any money. You may not have any billables. So, it's just interesting, like, because there's, I'm really, really glad the experiences I had have given me a greater appreciation and a greater understanding. So when we want to, people are out there and they're wanting to, like, I don't know, kill the rich or pitchforks, and these business owners are all horrible, awful people. It's like, man, yes, there are egregious employers. There's also egregious employees.
Mhm.
And the thing to just keep in mind is that most people aren't that way, and that a lot of business owners aren't the ones rolling, disadvantaging all their employees or whatever. A lot of them are struggling, and it's hard. And the mindset's so different. That's the stresses were so different between an employee. I mean, do I have a stress-free life? Absolutely not. But I have the stresses that I experience as a quote employee, as compared to being a business owner, they're not even in the same realms anymore. Well, they're not. Well, I don't know. That's the thing. Stress is stress, and we can make stress out of a lot of different things, but the realms are so different now. I just can't even compare them. Although still, as we see, like, oh my God, when I'm off on a weekend or I'm off and I'm like, this is like the greatest thing. I don't have to think about anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah. And it definitely is a different realm too, when you come to patient care and medicine versus like selling iPads.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you could generate, if I was to put some kind of course on like everything you need to know about anesthesia and have an online course, it's evergreen, and I make money when I sleep or when I, there's no real like follow through and like worrying about people's like safety, and that someone else who's taking care of that or doing surgery on them, that I got to be there. Like, it's a totally different ball game. I could, if I was just selling that and had money coming in and I could travel the world and I wouldn't have to have any like responsibility and direct patient care, or have someone in my place to direct patient care, knowing that there's these human variables like car accidents, illness, delays, cancellations, it's so hard to like express to people what level of stress that can create. That's just kind of we're just so used to it in this field of medicine that I don't think we realize that people don't conceptually understand those concerns.
Well, they don't. And the other thing I would also say, though, is because particularly in physicians and burnout, and they're like trying to get out of medicine, and there are physicians selling courses and trying all this stuff, and there are people that can do very, very well. Like, again, when I was on my own and I was doing the conferences, and you're meeting these entrepreneurs, these internet entrepreneurs that you just can't even believe. I mean, there's still stress, but they're living these lives that you didn't even think were possible because of the way they set their life up. That all being said, there are very, very few training pathways where you can step out on your first day of being attending and make multiple six figures guaranteed.
Yeah.
And that needs to be never forgotten as a physician, is what we're getting reimbursed for. And we can say, oh, it's not enough, whatever, depending on where you are and the viewpoint is, but there are very few things that you can step out and be making multiple six figures. Yeah. And to then try to go and do courses or whatever, the realistic likelihood of you making the equivalent of what your physician's salary is doing non-clinical, non-medical stuff is very, very low. Very, very low. And it's not saying not to do it, but again, don't think the grass is necessarily greener anywhere. Or if you are moving, I'm going to leave medicine, I'm going to do something else. You can absolutely do it. That's what we've brought people on. We've talked about these things. I'm completely non-clinical now, but the differences in pay are different. And that's where the flexibility comes in, because if you're going to be, you're going to an employed physician, and then you're going to go to a solopreneur business owner, the stresses are different. The thought process are different. Your living is going to be different. Your time is going to be different. And it's very, very likely, at least on the physician end, that your income is going to be markedly different. Yeah. It's just the way of the beast. So,
yeah. And just to reinforce that non-reimbursed kind of time, I just spent 3.5 hours doing pre-ops that aren't necessary. And I've already asked one insurance company if they reimburse me for that for, insurance cases. And they're like, we don't have a code for that. Educating your patient and like, they're brilliant. They don't pay you for stuff unless like, oh, you're actually putting anesthesia into these patients. That time, invoicing, reviewing, projecting, reassessing your schedule, communicating by text or email with patients, which is not all the time. The in-between time between cases, if there's delays on turning over the room, that's not reimbursable time. Getting up there, prepping your place in the morning before the first patient, or even just gathering, organizing at the end, uploading files, keeping your own, medical records in a portal, developing that portal, thinking about or just having conversations with people you work with to enhance, your relationships, or just discussing patients. And there's, probably 7 hours a week of just like pre-ops that I do with two half days. So none of that, and then worrying about a patient, like no one talks to you about, you're not gonna get reimbursed for thinking and caring about a patient and follow through and doing feedback, getting feedback from patients that you actually care how things went, and then developing that as information to give back to the surgeon to show the value you have. Not just keeping them safe, but trying to create a different anesthesia experience. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. And then you got the taxes, and then you got to do all your accounting, QuickBooks stuff. And it doesn't really stop. So for those that are employees, it's really important to understand that if you are going to have a successful business that's organized, it's not like you look like you're just chasing your tail. It takes time.
Actually, I'm just sitting here thinking like, okay, so for most of medicine, like most of traditional medicine as a physician, you almost have the worst of both worlds. Really. Right? Because if you're an employed physician that may or may not not be attached to an RVU, where your strict salary or your salary is attached to RVUs, but all those things that you have about when it comes to patient specific worries and all that extra time is totally relevant to medicine, right? Because you have people calling, you have people doing their messages, all this stuff that nobody's getting reimbursed for. Mm-hmm. And I get the hard part for being an employee in clinical medicine then is, unless someone's fighting for you to either offload that or make that easier or build it into your revenue schedule, and I don't think there is anybody, because it's not directly relevant to them. And we have this wonderful thing as humans that if it's not directly relevant to us, we tend to not care about it. It makes it difficult. But so we've just made this whole thing on the difference between employee and business mindsets. But a lot of when it comes to medicine, a lot of times you get stuck in the middle, really. I mean, I'm just thinking like primary care specifically, employed primary care docs with large healthcare systems who are employees and have a lot of rigidity about that. And yet they have all this extra stuff, particularly the things the clinically relevant things that you just said is over every single primary care doc's head every single day. Mm-hmm. And so now they're stuck in this thing where they're an employee with all the disadvantages of being an employee, and that they have all these things that they need to be concerned of, which are all the disadvantages of a business owner. Go start your direct primary care practice. I guess that's the answer to that, because holy moly.
Yeah, you set your own rate, you set your own fees, and if people value what you have to offer, they'll pay it. And you still have those things to be worried about. And that's the burden you take, responsibility you take with caring about patients. That's
well, and we talked about that briefly, not briefly, but in all the different direct primary care talks that we've had and physicians that we had. One of the advantages that they have is they create a business, create a structure, and it's a membership model, mm-hmm. which is very different than a fee for service model. And now you got predictability, mm-hmm. and that quote unquote dead time is built in because mm-hmm. you're being paid that monthly rate. So, all right. Anyway, if you're if you're primary care doc, man, look at direct primary care or find that model, because I'm so impressed with it. Recognizing that even then it's going to be a different sort of mindset, because you are now solely responsible for everything.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Even on your days off, even though, but they do it, and it is a little bit different. And you're still, I mean, if you're like my wife, when on your days off, you're still worrying about whoever you just saw.
Yeah.
And,
and if anyone's not a physician listening to this, just know that if people are just doing stuff for money and just trying to get to work and go home and they're burned out, like they just do what they're reimbursed for, that is not necessarily going to create the most value to you. In my opinion, there are some situations where just getting that done is fine enough. But I do feel like, especially direct primary care, the people that do all these things that are not reimbursed, they're doing it because it seems like the right thing to do, and they actually care. Not just the business intricacies, like the worries, the concerns, creating something that is better for you, making things convenient for you, trying to find the resources for you. That is someone who genuinely cares. And I think that sometimes people don't realize how much is going on in a physician's brain when they really care about you. Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on that before we finish the episode?
no, I think that's completely true. I think there's a lot of physicians, because most physicians went into medicine not because to make money, but because they wanted to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it's the physicians that tend to care the most tend to get taken advantage of the most.
Mm-hmm.
In a healthcare setting. I think we see that often, because they won't not do it because they'll feel it's the right thing to do. But there's only so much you can shoulder before you start cracking under the load. Anyway, so
I one last comment I would say is, when you're an employee in that situation, it is extraordinarily crushing to your soul sometimes when you feel taken advantage of for how much you care and what you're giving and not being reimbursed for it. There is some level of gratification, even if you're putting all that same effort as a self-employed physician or a solo business owner, because you get that autonomy that goes with the freedom to do things the way you feel is fit. Even if you may not be getting paid more, there's something to say about that. There's just so much gratification that comes from delivering something that's uniquely you and seems like the patients are benefiting from, and the money is only secondary to that. So anyway,
yeah, autonomy is a powerful driver for meaning, purpose, and so I guess if you are an employer, is how do you maintain then a level of autonomy with your employees so they feel that as well? Because that is definitely one of the prime drivers of being a business owner, is the sense of autonomy that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is great. That is really fantastic.
Yeah, well, take us out.
All right. Well, you heard us kind of talk and go all over the place about the difference between a business owner and an employee. Unfortunately, for physicians, you tend to get screwed as an employee. You have the worries of the business owner with the worries and lack of autonomy of an employee. How do you fix that? You listen to the Change Physician. We have had multiple interviews on here. With your background there, you can always take control of of your life and your practice. And knowing that you can change things is absolutely key. So you don't have to be crushing your soul like Dr. Katie was just talking about there. There are options for you. Even if people want to tell you that you don't have any options, there's always options. If you want to learn more about that, go to changephysician.com. And until next time, stay well.
Take care.